For the next 2 weeks, for a lot of you, it's going to be win and get in, or it's going to be win and clinch that number 1 seed for the fantasy playoffs. Whatever it is, this is the most important time of the year for us fantasy players, and we need to be making the right decisions as much as we possibly can, and I'm going to try my best to do that for you guys yet again this week. But without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off here at the quarterback position, and I'm going to start with this Texans and Broncos matchup this Sunday. For CJ Stroud, even in a loss, he managed 31 fantasy points last week in the loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars. This week, he's playing a bottom 10 defense against the quarterback position, and they've also given up 17 plus fantasy points to 3 quarterbacks on the road this year. We're talking about the Denver Broncos. So no shocker here, CJ Stroud remains a must start, especially with 6 different teams on bye. For Mr. Unlimited, Russell Wilson, they've won 5 straight games, and he's been giving us a safe floor as a fantasy quarterback. However, I like his ceiling this week as he's facing a Texans defense that has allowed over the last 4 weeks 300 passing yards per game and 21.5 fantasy points to quarterbacks, again, over the last 4 weeks. With 6 teams on bye, I think both of these guys are nice bye-week replacements. For CJ Stroud, he's obviously a must-start. For Jordan Love, though, I love the player. I love the talent. I've watched him since he was at Utah State. However, I'm going to sit him this week against the Kansas City Chiefs as I love the potential upset this week. However, this is a week where we need to put our best foot forward and we need to make the playoffs or, again, clinch that number 1 seed. So starting a wild card like this is just not in the realm of what we should be doing. It's not in the realm of possibility, and it's not something that I would advise. Jordan Love's been on a tear. I mean, he's averaged 60. He's had a total of 60 points over the last 2 weeks. Quick math, that's 30 points the last 2 weeks. This is his best ball of his career, but for the sake of our playoff lives in fantasy football, let's set Jordan Love this week. But how about his teammate, Christian Watson, a guy that finally gave us that game that we've been looking for even prior to the season, which is the reason some of you guys drafted him. As last week, he could put up 5 receptions, 94 yards, and a touchdown, resulting in about 15.5 fantasy points. However, just like Jordan Love, his quarterback, they're playing a very tough Chiefs defense this week, a defense that has a great secondary, and they're currently the 7th worst matchup for fantasy wide receivers. I know bye weeks will make it tough with a lot of good options on bye this week, but I would not roll with the hot hand of Christian Watson this week. I guess going up against Kansas City is a good way to put it, even though they're home at Lambeau Field. At the running back position, now let's talk about a hometown guy for me in Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford's floor, no pun intended, has been around 12 points. So, it makes him a tough sit option on a weekly basis if he's giving you that 12-point floor. However, this week he plays the Rams, a top 10 defense against the running back position, and they've only allowed 5 total touchdowns to running backs all season. I know it's tempting with the injuries in this offense, but we don't know what this offense is going to look like with either Joe Flacco or PJ Walker at the quarterback position, no Amari Cooper, and a lot of injuries to the defensive side of the ball. I think this could be an easy blowout for the LA Rams, so I would steer away from all Cleveland Browns this weekend, maybe aside from David Njoku, if you can. But how about a running back that I really love just for the player and for the fantasy aspect? But Ramondre Stevenson, I mean, he's been on a tear, scoring 21 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. As you see in the top left, he's the 10th ranked running back over the last 3 weeks. But he's separated himself more and more from Zeke Elliott. Of course, there was a stretch where Zeke was the number 1 in this backfield, but it's now in Ramondre's. And Ramondre's here to save our fantasy teams and to win some championships. I think Ramondre this week against the Chargers, who don't have a defense, I think he can maybe find his way into the end zone not once, not twice, maybe even 3 times. As crazy as that sounds, this might be that kind of week for Ramondre Stevenson. But then let's talk about the Thursday night running back, the guy that's going to be going tonight against the tough Dallas Cowboys defense in Zach Charbonnet. Look, he's going to have a lot of volume with Ken Walker out yet again, but he's playing a Cowboys defense that has allowed just 6 touchdowns to the position all year, and they are only allowing about 17 total points a week to all of the running backs on each team on a weekly basis. So Zach Charbonnet, to me, at best, he's a flex play. He's a running back 3 if your league has that many slots. But to me, I just wouldn't risk it. I would sit Zach Charbonnet against that very tough Dallas defense. And not to mention, that Seattle offense has not been the best as of late. At the wide receiver position, let's talk about Hollywood, Marquise Brown, and Hollywood and Kyler Murray. They finally got on that same page last week as Hollywood Brown was targeted 12 times and he scored 15 fantasy points despite missing practice all week. So this week he's fully healthy and he's back to practice, so you would expect him to do better. And I honestly agree with that, as this week they play the Steelers, and the Steelers defense that has allowed 12 plus point fantasy games this year. They've allowed 5 of those to be 19 plus point outings, and 3 of those have been 30 plus point outings. So the whole point I'm giving you all these numbers is because there's the potential that this guy could blow up this week and score you 25 to 30 fantasy points. So to me, he's a must start this week, especially with the 6 teams on bye. Another wide receiver is Christian Kirk, a guy that I just love, the archetype kind of player, the Amon-Ra, the Keenan Allen, and the Christian Kirk kind of players, guys that just show up, do their job, and score us a lot of fantasy points. But for Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley has no doubt been the best Jaguars wide receiver the last 2 or 3 weeks, but I do think Christian Kirk can have a pretty big week this weekend, as he just missed out on a scoring touchdown last week, which of course would have made his numbers better than what they were. But this week he plays the Bengals, which is a favorable matchup, especially due to the injuries they've had at the quarterback position. But for the Jaguars, they're playing a defense that has allowed the 9th most points to slot wide receivers this season. And you guessed it, Christian Kirk is a slot wide receiver in the Jacksonville offense that has been amazing, by the way. Trevor Lawrence has averaged like 300 passing yards a game over the last month or so. So Christian Kirk, to me, is a must-play. And again, he's playing on Monday night. He could save you your week and maybe clinch you a playoff spot. Another wide receiver is a rookie in Rashied Rice. At the last 2 weeks, 16.5 fantasy points on average, 14th best wide receiver, and for a lot of us, he's been on our bench. But if it was ever in question from the start of the year, Rashied Rice is now officially Patrick Mahomes' number 1 wide receiver. As last week, Rashied Rice had 10 targets, 8 receptions, 100 plus yards, and a touchdown. Are you kidding me? 25 fantasy points for Rashied Rice. If that's a sign of things to come, he could be a fantasy sleeper and a fantasy winner down the stretch of the year. But given the buys this week, I think Rashied Rice is a must start. But let's talk about a sit wide receiver at the wide receiver position in Drake London. Last week he put up 14 fantasy points in a win over the Saints, and a lot of that came on 2 or 3 big catches. However, this week he plays the Jets, who have allowed the fewest points per game to wide receivers that play on the perimeter, and that's important for one reason and one reason only. For one, he's playing probably the best cornerback duo in the NFL of Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, but also, despite playing the best cornerback duo, the Jets have not allowed a single touchdown to perimeter wide receivers this season, which again, you guessed it, is Drake London. So to me, given the quarterback situation, given the tough matchup on the road in New York, I would sit Drake London this week, even though you might have to play him given the bye weeks, but I would steer away if possible. And then at the tight end position, I want to talk about Dalton Schultz, a guy that on the year is the tight end 8. But Dalton Schultz was no doubt a letdown last week. I think he only had like 0.7 or it was a 1.7 fantasy points. Regardless, he had less than 2 fantasy points last week, and he definitely didn't help us win. If anything, he helped us lose last week. Regardless, it still has been a great season for Dalton Schultz. He's the tight end 8 on the year, and this week he plays the Denver Broncos, who have allowed the most fantasy points to tight ends all season. I would expect this game to be relatively high scoring, and as long as Dalton Schultz can find himself in the end zone at least once, I think it could be a pretty big game, and he can get back on track in a big way for the Houston Texans, especially with the bye weeks. I think if it wasn't in question before, it shouldn't be now. Start Dalton Schultz this weekend against the Broncos. But that's going to do it here for today's episode. Again, the goal of these is to get you in and out with the most knowledge in the shortest amount of time. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, help us on the road to 6,000 subs. Drop a like, subscribe, tell a friend about the podcast. And again, we can't get to those next big milestones without you. So thank you for all your support. Good luck to your real-life teams this weekend, unless you're a Rams fan. Good luck to your fantasy teams this weekend. Of course, we need to make those playoffs. And until Tuesday, have a great weekend. Get out of here.